All right, so I'm gonna go through this capstone project I did for the Bootcamp Galvanize, which was the final project of the four-person team that I was on. I'm gonna try to fly through as much as I can for the sake of keeping the video short, which means I might skip over a lot of details. Hopefully, this will be a good enough overview. So the minimum requirements were front end, back end orchestrator, two supporting microservices, and a database. And I'll go more into that later. There was a requirement of 4 more planning tools. We used wireframes, Plant UML, Swagger, and user stories, and I'm not going to include those in the video, but I do have them available if requested. I guess more in a private setting. Collaboration, we did have each team member lead at least one day stand up and collaborate with written text in the chat as sufficiently required. And backend test coverage was supposed to be 50% or more across all deployed microservices, and we ended up attaining around 70%, or maybe a little more than that by the end. So we weren't really clear from the beginning how the bootcamp was going to work. So we started out in week 2 making this application. 2 of my teammates took the back-end microservices. I was given the assignment of the front end, and my last teammate took kind of like a back-end orchestrator role, but that ended up falling through, and then he ended up kind of more focusing on contributing to the front end. And then later on, because things kept changing so much, he kind of took out what he added to my front end, or the front end that I wrote, and separated it into another front end, which so I'll show you what that was like a little later. And then he, at the end of right before the capstone was due, he actually did end up writing the backend orchestrator again. Like he just basically started over and just took that task from the beginning, right near the end of boot camp, and he actually did end up pulling through on that. So in the end, we ended up having 2 separate front ends. So that's what I talked about. It started out as just the one front end, and then after he kind of took out the stuff he wrote, and he kind of made a separate admin UI front end out of that. This is the orchestrator he ended up writing at the very end. These are the other microservices, so we ended up having 6 in total, and I ended up contributing with kind of the extra stretch goal free time I had, an accessories backend microservice. And so basically out of the entire project, we had a MySQL database. I ended up contributing the public UI and the accessories microservice in terms of fully writing and deploying on my own, completely by myself. And I'm just going to show the public UI kind of briefly as it is as it was at the capstone submission, just because it's not that important what the application looked like, I don't think, on the front end. It just has a simple redirect page from the root URL to the phone's route. And originally this was supposed to be the home page, so this was actually supposed to be home. But then we added the accessories later, so we kind of separated it into the phone's route and accessories route. And then this is the accessories. And this is the shopping cart, and it's very simple, but it works like we intended it to in every single way. And basically we try not to focus on the things that weren't important or conducive to our learning, I guess. Because I think everybody knew how to style and stuff, so that's why there's a lot of styling issues. And we had limited time in the sense that it was only a 5-week boot camp, so we were trying to make the most out of our learning as possible, and we were also trying to follow the guidelines of the boot camp. And the guidelines, like the instructors made it clear that the goals were to learn deployment pipelines, and also CRUD functionality between deployed microservices and deployed front end. So that meant, we focused on things like Docker, Kubernetes, Gitlab CI/CD pipelines, PCF, Conductor, which is actually the T-Mobile service that we end up using to deploy these projects in the end. So this is actually a Conductor application right now. And we also function on that CRUD functionality like we talked about, or like I just talked about. So we didn't try to do anything fancy other than focus on that. So if we go into the modal, actually doesn't have any reviews. We kind of just made it simple. Originally, it didn't have all this like kind of fancy stuff. We added that at the end. It was just very basic. Actually, like even the image, we just had one static image for every single phone. It was very ugly, I guess, or very simple. And all we tried to focus on was getting the CRUD functionality to work between the reviews microservice and this front end. And for the products microservice, like it was basically just a GET request. But in terms of like editing, updating, creating, deleting, we did all that with the reviews. So if you look here, there's ability to create a review. And then there's also the ability to edit a review. And there's also the ability. So this one has a can delete false flag, which is why the delete button's disabled. But if I can still delete this one, and it'll be gone. So yeah, that was basically, long story short, we were focusing on those things. Towards the end of the project, we actually, I would say like with a couple weeks left in the project, we had a lot of extra time. So we kind of added stuff, and that's when I also kind of decided to throw the front end to the side and focus on deploying my own backend microservice. And if I talk about the backend microservice, it'll probably be in a separate video. But I did deploy the accessories backend microservice, and I ended up, after I deployed that, I connected it to this front end. And this just has very simple update functionality, and that's it. I think that's pretty much all that needs to be said. There's like some extra stuff here, like since we had free time, we tried to make it look a little bit cooler, I guess. This can't actually make a phone call, although that's what we kind of had as a stretch goal. Light dark mode, you kind of mess with the image here. This is a QR code where you can grab the article that's set to this link from your mobile phone using your camera, just kind of as like I don't know, like an extra cool thing. And this camera, it's not that important, but this camera is kind of somewhat dynamic. It kind of takes the height and width from the back end of the actual phone, and it'll shoot it through to the front end. So if you open, actually, this one might be better. If you open this one, the phone will look bigger, and it's kind of custom styled to look closer to a Galaxy than an iPhone, but it's not really that close. So that's pretty much it. The only other thing I would want to talk about regarding the front end is that we didn't really have the ability to foresee that in week 2 that this was going to be a capstone. So I didn't actually try to implement any type of client-side state management. Um, I thought, it was going to be very simple, so I just used local storage instead of, something like Redux, which is what I would usually do. So the shopping cart is completely, and I still didn't change it after we learned it was going to be a capstone because I didn't think that was the focus that I should be making a priority to do. Um, so this shopping cart is still used or still set using local storage, and you know I I could probably go through the code and show how I did that, but I don't want to take up time in the video for that. Basically, just to make a long story short, it every time you add a phone to the cart, which you do through here, kind of sets that in local storage, and then when you go to the cart, it's calculated based upon a for loop that goes through the local storage and checks each phone by ID to see if it's in the local storage or not, and then it sets those quantity amounts based upon what has been set in local storage already. So yeah, that's long story short, um, the project in full, as at least in terms of like the front end. I don't think I've left anything that important out. We did, like I said, oh, you know what? I do want to go through these things real quick because they were actually like the most important parts of the project. Um, if I had more time, I would talk about how we communicate with the microservices, which happens through here and through these service files. But I'm just gonna hold off on that. Instead, I just want to talk about what the main point of all this was, and for at least in my mind, it was to focus on learning these tools like Docker and Gitlab CI, CI/CD, and PCF and Conductor, and I don't think I'm leaving anything out. So just going to go through how we actually deployed and served the application. We did it, so our bootcamp was not really set up to accommodate React. It was actually supposed to be more back-end focused. Um, so there was a lot of instruction on how to serve up, Java, Spring Boot applications and stuff. And for front end, like front end was a requirement of each team, but it wasn't the focus. So they offered Angular as um, the learning tools for us to use because T-Mobile tends to use Angular for most of their front end still. But they did say that we were allowed to use React, and to me, since I was focused more on actually learning deployment and pipelines, I didn't think it was necessary to learn Angular and write the application, the front end in Angular, um, just to serve it up, you know. And since they said that React was okay, I just basically decided to, write something simple in React and then focus on the pipeline. The only problem with that was, actually, this Docker file is actually the same Docker file that they kind of taught us for the Angular front end as well. So it would have been the same problem, or not really problem, but it would have been the same type of way or method with Angular, even if I decided to learn Angular, which I don't know, I never learned Angular before. So even if I did, we would have used the same kind of format to do everything. So it's kind of unusual because what we're doing is basically we're using a Python-based image. I did some kind of individual research into it, and it seems like most people who use React applications with Docker tend to use the standard node image, and then any type of npm scripts, and just kind of build the application using npm within the Docker file and all that. So we obviously didn't do that. We just kind of followed what the bootcamp gave us. And the way the bootcamp did it was they're kind of using a Python-based image, and they're just copying this build folder, like, um, you know, literally just copying files. And then whatever they copy from that build folder, they're serving it onto a simple Python server. The problem with that is it's, to me, it was a headache because, every time we pushed the application to GitLab, we would have to include the build folder, because if the build folder wasn't there, this Docker file wouldn't be able to copy it because it wasn't there. This Docker file wouldn't npm build the React application itself. So, and the fact that we had to include the build folder to push when we pushed it to GitLab, first of all, it was just didn't feel right, and second of all, when it came to linting, created like another headache because even if the entire application was clean, the build folder would have throw all kinds of lint issues. Anyways, that's not that important, but I'm just kind of just trying to explain exactly how we use Docker and why it was kind of like unconventional how we used it. So that was kind of the Docker side. We're literally just we're building the build ourselves every time we're done development, and then we're pushing that build to GitLab, and then